Good morning. So today we come to day 304. In the saga of Holy Week, we find ourselves during the night between Maundy Thursday and Good Friday. And we see how Mark recalls for us the events of that fateful night in Mark chapter 14, verse 66 to chapter 15, verse 1. Peter was waiting downstairs in the courtyard when one of the maids who worked for the high priest came out and saw him warming himself. She looked at him and said, "Yes, and you too, you were with that Nazarene Jesus." But he denied it. He said, "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." And he walked out to the gateway. The maid saw him there too, and pointed him out to those standing near. "Look at that man, he's one of them." And yet again he denied it. But after a short time the bystanders spoke to Peter. "You must be one of them. Yes, you're a Galilean." And he started cursing and swearing. "I have no idea who this person is that you're talking about." At that moment the cock crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Jesus had said earlier, "Before the cock crows twice, you will have disowned me 3 times, and he broke down in tears. So, after his arrest, Jesus was taken first to a rather dodgy assembly of his opponents at the high priest's residence. This assembly could in no way be regarded as any kind of official hearing. They were powerless on their own to place any sanctions on him, despite having him at last away from the crowds who loved him and now helpless in their power. Mark notes their difficulty in framing any charges they might bring against him, presumably in formal court the next day. They were in a hurry to get this all over with before the crowds, possibly sympathetic to him, might throng Jerusalem in the holiday week that followed. Jesus wisely said nothing until the high priest put it bluntly to him, Mark chapter 14, verse 61, "Are you actually the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" By which he meant, was Jesus a legitimate descendant not of God, but of David? In his powerless state, Jesus said to him, "I am," which is of course God's name, Yahweh. And then he continued, "And you will behold the Son of Man himself sitting at the right-hand side of God's power and returning with the clouds of heaven." The priests took this as a blasphemous statement and started using physical violence against him immediately. They had decided to hand him over in the morning, not to a religious court with all the delays due to the Passover holiday, but to the Roman authorities. And they would charge him with insurrection because he had claimed to be the Messiah. Either Nicodemus or Joseph of Arimathea were possible sources for what was happening behind these closed doors. Meanwhile, outside, warming himself by a blazing hot fire in the forecourt, Peter was awaiting developments. He had got as close as possible, a dangerous place to put himself, because one of the maids working in the big house recognized him as one of the disciples. She said so to him, and then subsequently to some people standing in the gateway where he had retreated. And then they too, having noticed his northern accent, put 2 and 2 together, and they accused him as well. Peter broke down, in frustration and anger first, for having been so foolish as to get found out. And then he remembered Jesus' words and broke down in tears of guilt and frustration. The next day was to be Good Friday. And tomorrow we shall look at how Mark recalled the events of that day, and I'll see you then.